So here's your second lecture burst for Chapter 12, Social Psych. We ended with the last one talking a lot about obedience and conformity and compliance. And so this one I would like to turn your attention to attitudes as well as some other components in social psych, helping behavior, prosocial behavior. So attitudes are really the underlying content to everything, really. One of the things I don't like about these slides is it puts attitudes after discussion of compliance and obedience, but attitudes are really the underlying component because an attitude is that tendency to respond positively or negatively towards someone or something, right? We have an attitude about a lot of things, but that attitude is comprised of our affect, so our emotion. A lot of times our attitudes are very based on our emotions at the moment: fear, surprise, disgust, anger, jealousy, right? So there's that affective component. There's also a behavioral component. What are we doing currently that can affect how we feel about something or what we think about something? And then the cognitive component. Have we thought about this? Is it something we've given a lot of thought to, or is it something that we've been trained to think or do without even realizing it? So that kind of leaves us with those three areas. Now, if we want to look at sort of the breakdown of that, you could see some examples of what each of those might be. Okay, like what would be the affect, what would be the behavior, and then what would be the cognition. If your attitude is you have one towards country music, you either like it or you don't like it, right? I like country music, it's fun and it's uplifting. Well, that's affect speaking. I only listen to country music. I'm going to a country music concert soon. Well, that's behavior. You actually physically do listen to that kind of music and you do attend concerts that have that music. The cognition might be, I think country music is better than any other kind. Okay, that's what you think. Maybe you've based that thought on research. Maybe you've listened to lots of different kinds and that's the one you pick. But those are the three components, okay? The issue is that attitudes are often poor predictors of behavior. Just because we think something or feel something or have an attitude towards something doesn't mean that our behavior is going to fall in line. A lot of times, our behavior is totally contradictory to what we think or feel because of peer pressure or obedience to authority. We have to obey. We have to do this even though we don't think we should or we don't want to. Or we're going to do this because I want to be popular, or I really want to hang out with these people and they're doing this. So, the problem with attitudes is that they're flighty, they're shifty, they're iffy, and they don't often accurately predict how we're going to behave. Just because I know how someone feels or thinks about something does not mean I can accurately predict how they might vote or how they might view something in general. Now, the stronger the attitude, the more likely we will be able to predict behavior. But that is a strong attitude. If someone holds an opinion or a viewpoint about something and it is a very much so a central tenet of their identity, it's embedded in who they are and what they do and everything they're all about, then it's a better predictor of me being able to say, oh yeah, I know they're going to vote this way because it's their platform. They talk about it all the time. They've done their research. It's, this is how they voted every single time in the past. So that would be a more accurate predictor. Our attitudes come from the people we're around, who we're with, which involves conditioning. So remember, we talked a lot about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. These can influence the attitudes that we form without us even knowing it. Vicarious conditioning, just by watching others modeling, helps us form our attitudes. And this is what we do much so when we're young. Now, our attitudes, because they're flighty and because they're shifty, can be changed. So that's where the art of persuasion comes in. If I know people's attitudes are so unstable, I might have an advantage as someone who is trying to be persuasive. And if I learn what those techniques are, I could persuade someone to vote the way I want them to vote or buy the product I want them to buy. So key elements in persuasion are where the message is coming from, who's trying to persuade you, what is the message, like how are they trying to do that, and who are they targeting, what's their audience, and what's their venue. Is it through media, is it through direct conversation? How might that look? We talk about the elaboration likelihood model, which is just basically that people are going to make or be persuaded, I should say, based on how information is presented to them. They're going to use two main routes, the central or the peripheral route. The central route to changing someone's attitude is really attending to the content of the message. It's a very direct, in-your-face type of processing. And I have to actually be paying attention to the content of the message to process it in this way. Whereas the peripheral route is using all kinds of side cues, kind of like schemas we've talked about in the past. They might persuade you via showing you something flashy or something that looks nice or sounds nice. So it's attending to factors not in the message itself, but in who's delivering that message and how is it being delivered. Because chances are we're going to pay a lot of attention to the messenger and not always the message, right? Who's delivering a message can affect how we receive that message. It could be a really important message that we need to hear and we need it. But if it's not being conveyed in the right way, we're not going to receive it. So peripheral route processing is better for media. They're banking on people making quick split decision making, buying behavior, and processing that they're not really thinking too much about it. They're just deciding quickly. Whereas central route processing is not the route that they go, because this would be someone carefully thinking through, like, do I want to buy this car and what does that mean? There's some videos on Play-Doh that I posted about the elaboration likelihood model and how it works in terms of central and peripheral route processing. So make sure you check those out. And definitely the courtroom. The book talks a lot about the courtroom as being an avenue for where we see this happen the most. Now, we talk about attitudes not being good predictors of behavior, right? One thing that comes into play is cognitive dissonance, which is basically thinking one thing and doing another. Which creates a very uncomfortable state for the person. Okay, if you know smoking is bad and you know that logically, everyone talks about it. We obviously have laws against where you can smoke, and studies that confirm how bad it is for you. There's no hiding the fact that it's not good, but yet you're smoking. How does an individual deal with that? They probably don't feel good knowing they're doing something that's bad for them. So what do? Well, it creates this state of cognitive dissonance. So you could either change your attitude about smoking and come to think that, well, it's not that bad. I'm young, I'm not going to die soon. What's the big deal? Or you could change your behavior. You could quit smoking because it's bad. Which one sounds more plausible to you, right? Behaviors are hard to change. And so oftentimes people will compromise with how they feel about the behavior. So they'll start to negate the things that they know are wrong. They'll start to think it's not so bad or not such a big deal, or I don't really need to pay attention to this. So they'll minimize the attitude so that they can keep doing the behavior. So I want you all to watch this video. It's a really short 2-3 minute video about cognitive dissonance. I've also posted a video in Play-Doh for you too. Okay, and you're going to look at, this is just a pull out of the Festinger and Carlsmith study. It's talked about in your book. It's actually also talked about in the Hawk readings. I just didn't assign that as one of the readings for you, but it's in there if you want some more information to kind of see how cognitive dissonance operates. That would be a good place to go. Okay, so look at how and when cognitive dissonance occurs and when it's more likely. This next section here deals with impression formation, which is basically just like first impressions. How do we form impressions of people? How do we determine what they're like and who they are just based on very minimal information? It's a lot of emphasis on nonverbal cues, reading people's facial expressions, being able to size people up very quickly based on experience, based on what we know as a culture from watching people, their physical appearance, and things like that, and what we use to build that first impression. A lot of it, unfortunately, is based in stereotypes. We might not know a lot about, say, an Indian person, right, from India. Maybe we've had very little exposure to an Indian person, that ethnic group. So what we're going to do when we form an impression of someone who is Indian is we might rely a lot on stereotypes, which, can be bad, right? And can be very misleading, and doesn't accurately conceptualize an entire group of people. But we, nonetheless, when we're forming impressions of people, we tend to take a lot of cognitive shortcuts, and stereotypes are one of those cognitive shortcuts. We shortchange ourselves so we don't have to think too much about things, and we come to quick decisions about people based on very little information or invalid or overused information like stereotypes can be. So it relies a lot on schemas. It differs from culture to culture. I posted a video about this test here, the implicit association test. It measures how sort of prejudice we can be when we are sizing people up and making assumptions about people. We're forming an opinion about somebody, how we can often be in error in doing that because we're not even aware how things affect us. We've embedded so many messages about culture and people and things, and those messages are all in our brain, and we access them at any point in time without even realizing we're doing so. So we may have a feeling about someone that kind of peeks out, but I really want you to watch the video, see how they test people for implicit prejudice, and how people associate different things together, and see how that works and how that relates to stereotyping and prejudice, because that's really what the rest of the chapter kind of focuses on, is attributing causes to people's behavior. And a lot of the attributions, like, hey, I think you did this because of this, that's an attribution. We're making an educated or even uneducated guess as to why someone did something, right? And a lot of that is fed by stereotypes and prejudice and experience. But what we do a lot of when we're sizing someone up and we're trying to determine why'd they act that way, why'd they say that, why'd they do that, that process of asking those whys is called attribution. And we rely a lot on people's dispositional causes. So I might decide somebody acted that way because they're just an angry person. I saw someone flip someone off, in their car driving, and I might look at that person and go, wow, they're just so angry, so upset. Like they must be a really just mad kind of person, a mad individual. I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the person, their disposition, their personality, their character, whereas maybe it was the situation that caused them to act the way that they act. Maybe they've never flipped someone off before, and that's not their norm, but this person caused them to get so angry that their behavior was caused by external factors or situational causes. So there's kind of two sides of the coin, situation and disposition. My internal things about me that might cause me to act a certain way, and then the external things about the situation that might cause me to act a certain way. And as you can guess, in our society, we tend to use too much emphasis on the person, the the disposition of the person. We don't factor in very much the situation. This is the fundamental attribution error. We rely too much on assuming someone act that way because that's who they are, rather than thinking about how the situation may have affected their behavior. Okay, so that's the other key kind of points I want you guys to get for this chapter.